On this episode of Civic Cocktail, Seattle Mayor Tim Burgess on his priorities.
We decided on day one that we weren't just going to have a caretaker administration.
And the challenges facing the city.
I mean, why would we tax the creation of new jobs? This city is booming economically.
Also, the Me Too movement focuses attention on harassment in the workplace.
This is about the treatment of human beings, and this can't go on. This culture has to end.
And on campus.
I feel pretty confident saying that probably almost every single woman you know, and a lot of men that you know, have been sexually harassed.
How many of you have had experiences with this? Put the cameras on.
Right, and there's cameras on.
Oh my gosh.
It's all coming up on Civic Cocktail.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Civic Cocktail. I'm Joni Balter here with Seattle Mayor for 71 days, Tim Burgess. Hi, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for joining us. Journalists helping with the questions this evening, Daniel Beekman from the Seattle Times, and Gene Godden, former Seattle City Council member and longtime journalist. Mr. Mayor for 71 days. That is so cool. That's like being queen for a day or something like that. And I wanted you to know that I would like to be mayor for 71 days.
Well, you should sign up.
And I should sign up. But
we
if I were mayor,
there's cycles here. So.
There are just a couple things I would do. I would get rid of the Bellevue yachts from Andrews Bay. I would lower the hedges at Chihuly Glass Garden at Seattle Center. Where's Howard Wright? Did you hear me on that one? And I would put mint and honey iced tea in the water fountains at Seattle City Hall. What did you do?
That's why you're not mayor.
Well, I guess maybe not. So go ahead.
Well, we've done a lot. We decided on day one that we weren't just going to have a caretaker administration, that we were going to use our 71 days for the maximum impact and get good things done for the people of Seattle, and we've been doing that. We announced an agreement that will allow the expansion of the convention center to go on. That was a project that had been stalled for a long time. We took very direct action on police off-duty work, the secondary employment of police officers. And there's more coming in the next couple of weeks.
There was some work that was done on police reform.
Yes.
Tell everybody here how we police differently than we did when we first got in trouble with the Justice Department.
There's been a remarkable change in policing in Seattle. Kind of the behind-the-scenes things in terms of better record keeping, better accountability, better training for officers, better training for frontline supervisors. All of those things are implemented and fully functioning. And Seattle gets a lot of credit for being leading the nation in some of those initiatives, especially with de-escalation training, crisis intervention work, those types of things.
So we're almost done with this consent decree.
Well, we hope.
What is left to do?
So we have petitioned the federal court, as has the Department of Justice, and the Community Police Commission has joined us in this, asking the federal court to declare that we are in compliance. And all that means is we end phase one and then start phase two. And phase two is a 2-year period going forward where the police department will continue to be evaluated by the federal monitoring team to make sure that all of the new accountability structures, the Community Police Commission, the Office of Police Accountability, the new Inspector General for Public Safety, that those entities are able to walk on their own and do their work effectively without the direct oversight of the federal government. At the end of the 2-year period, we'll get a report card on that, and then hopefully we'll be done.
I see.
But I'll add, Joni, that what's really important here is that these reforms take root and that they last and that the culture of the police department has changed.
Well, it seems like the second 2-year period would be there to assure that, right?
Exactly. That's why it's designed for that.
Moving along, it seems that maybe something like half the Seattle City Council wants a head tax. It's been called an Amazon tax. What's your take on that? Is that likely to happen?
Well, I can't tell you whether it's likely to happen or not. I'm not down on the second floor anymore, so.
Yeah, but you have friends there.
I have a few.
Maybe less and less as this goes on.
It's an ill-advised tax. I mean, why would we tax the creation of new jobs? If anything, we should be creating incentives to create new jobs. It's also ill-advised because Seattle already has the highest business tax rate of any city in the state of Washington. If we pass this so-called jobs tax, we would be double taxing businesses. No other municipality in Washington state does that. And it's my view that business already pays a fair share. They pay the business and occupation tax. They pay the property tax, either directly or through their landlord. And they pay sales tax on things that they purchase. So I just think it's ill-advised, and there's alternatives to that if we think we have to get more revenue.
Do you think the talk of a head tax or an Amazon tax during the summer and the passage of the local income tax had anything to do with Amazon creating the HQ2?
You know, I can't speak for Amazon. I don't know what they were thinking, but Seattle's business climate is thriving. This city is booming economically, and that's good news. The flip side of that is it creates some challenges. We've certainly seen that in affordability and in transportation and other issues. But, you know, some of my former colleagues take shots at the business community, and I think that's just nonsense. The business community is a member of the Seattle family, and we want them to be successful. Probably most of us in this room have a job. That comes from companies in Seattle, starting here, moving here, staying here. City government should be encouraging that.
So there have been several mayoral debates, and front and center in that campaign, of course, is the topic of homelessness.
Yes.
And also the topic of whether the homeless, you know, a variety of things, but specifically I wanted to ask you about whether homeless should be allowed to live in city parks, and it has come up in the mayoral race. What's your take on that? No,
they should not. There was a proposal a year ago to allow camping throughout the city.
It blew up big, as I recall. There were lots of phone calls.
There was a lot of reaction from the public on that. And, you know, we have a policy now of addressing these unauthorized encampments in the city. There's approximately 400 of them throughout the city. And when the city identifies specific public health or public safety problems with those encampments, we send our specially trained navigation team to meet with the folks who are living there. We offer them city services, but we remove the encampment if it's causing those health or safety issues. Thankfully, 40% of the people who are living in these encampments are now accepting city services of one form or another.
Is that a higher number than there had been before?
That's a huge increase from previous years, yes.
You wrote a letter recently to the City Council trying to kind of have an impact on the idea that the City Council might even stop sweeps. Tell us about that.
Well, we don't
I have it on my phone.
We don't do sweeps. That's a pejorative term that some people use. We do very targeted, deliberate removals and cleanups when we have specific public safety and public health challenges that we're trying to address. Some council members have proposed blocking the use of city funds for that activity, and the police chief, the fire chief, the director of public health, and myself warned the council that if they adopt that proviso in the budget and restrict the use of funds to do these targeted cleanups, that will increase the public health and safety risk to the people of Seattle. Well,
without showing your hand, since it's part of the budget, it's something you in this time period can affect. I mean, you could veto that.
I could. I'll wait and see what the council does in their wisdom when they present their final package.
So if you had to bet, will Chief O'Toole be the police chief next year at this time?
Well, I certainly hope so. That was, I think, one of the best decisions that Mayor Murray made, and thankfully he asked me to help him with that selection, and she is an outstanding chief of police. You know, the appointment of the chief of police is the most important appointment that a mayor will ever make.
That's what most mayors say.
Yeah, and it's very true. So,
but likelihood of her sticking around here, what do you know?
You know, Chief O'Toole can write her ticket wherever she wants in the United States and globally. She is in high demand because of the wisdom and the capabilities that she has, and the track record here in Seattle of reforming our police department. So I hope we can keep her longer.
Do you think that City Council President Bruce Harrell made the right choice? He recently said that the city should, in fact, defend some of those statements that Councilmember Shamma Sawant made And as most of you know, he said that because he decided that she said those things, whether you like them or not, in her public capacity. Did you agree with that?
Well, I think what Council President Harrell said was not that we were going to defend her statements, but we were going to defend her against these lawsuits that have been filed against her. That was a legal decision that the Council President made after consulting with the city attorney and outside legal experts on that issue, so I don't quarrel with that at all.
So entrepreneur Chris Hansen has
Yes.
offered to do performance space at Seattle Center and an NBA arena in Soto. How is this not a good deal for Seattle? Sort of hard to follow.
Exactly.
Really?
You know, we have a proposal now that's in front of the City Council for Key Arena at Seattle Center. That's a city property, city-owned property, and would remain a city-owned property. And I think the council is going to vote in early December as to whether to accept that proposal or not. Mr. Hansen still owes the city some information about this proposed Soto Arena. We understand.
What is that? What is that that's holding up? He seems so eager to do it, but then there's some information, I read that somewhere, that he was not able to provide. What is it? What's so exciting about it?
I think he is getting ready to provide that information to our Transportation Department evaluators so that they can finish their work on the proposed street vacation in Soto. I'm not sure what the timing of that's going to be, but I know the council is going to vote on Key Arena at Seattle Center the first week of December.
I think a lot of people think that Soto is the better location for obvious traffic reasons, but there's this word everywhere that the NBA doesn't like Chris Hansen. He did some stuff with Sacramento Kings that made the NBA dislike him. But is that the right way for us to make a decision here in Seattle?
Well, I don't know what the NBA thinks of Mr. Hansen or anyone else for that matter, but we have to make a decision based on what is in the long-term interests of Seattle. How do we protect our assets? And it's not just about sports. In Soto, there's other issues there with regard to transportation and the Port of Seattle and their operations. So we'll see what the council decides on that.
I see. Audience, if you'd like to join us, come on over to the mic holder there. We'll bring the journalists in right now.
Yes, we're busting with questions.
This journalist cannot be restrained.
Well, I'm well aware of that.
I know. Me too. I worked with her
We
too.
served together on the city council for several years, and in fact, at one point, there were 3 former journalists on the city council: Councilmember Godden, Councilmember Sally Clark, and myself, a former radio journalist. So we're down to none now.
Oh, boy.
Well, would you like a question?
Sure.
All right. If it turns out that the chief of police, Catherine O'Toole, decides to take another job, would it be possible that you would be a candidate for city chief of police?
I like the laugh.
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah.
Well, I have another one along those lines, another rumor. Would you ever be interested in being superintendent of Seattle Public Schools?
Now, that's a different question. I'm not sure about that. But
Picking up some interest here, right?
I think the city of Seattle should do a better job on education for all of our children. We have some amazing elementary, middle, and high schools, and then we have some others that are not up to par, frankly. And they usually are populated by students living in poverty and students of color. And what a shame a city like Seattle cannot make certain that all of our children receive a high quality education.
I think Garfield graduate Daniel Beekman has a question.
At the end of your 71 days, when you hand off to the new mayor, either Jenny Durkin or Carrie Moon, what advice are you going to give her at that time, both in terms of what it's like to be mayor and to be at City Hall in a position like that, and also in terms of the biggest challenge facing the city?
So if they ask me for my opinion, I'll be happy to share it. And it's great that we're going to have our second female mayor in Seattle. It's been a long time. I think I would caution them about the politics of Seattle and not to be caught up in some of the divisive rhetoric and some of the maneuvering we see among various factions in Seattle politics. The job of mayor of Seattle is to run this large organization, budget of about $6 billion a year, almost 12,000 city employees. It's really a management job to make sure that the policies set by the city council are carried out effectively. That requires a certain level of pragmatism, a very rational, clear thinking, being able to listen both to city folks who work for the city, but also throughout all of our neighborhoods and across the city. And it's also a leadership role, and being able to use the bully pulpit, if you will, to try to shape public opinion and guide where the city goes. And that all has to be done very deliberately and carefully. But one shouldn't, despite all of what I just said, one should not hold back. There are issues like education that I talked about, where I think the city government can do a much better job of helping to lead and partnering with the school district and nudging them along in the right direction so that our children benefit from that.
Audience, hi.
Hi. Mr. Mayor, you stated that you think the homes tax is a bad idea, and that if the city council feels that they need more resources, that there are alternatives. Given that this tax is specifically designed to provide additional services to houseless folks, we've had a declared state of emergency on homelessness for several years. During that time, the crisis has worsened, and current city council members have stated that they've received far more requests for monetary aid from service providers than they can give with their current budget. What alternatives would you suggest instead of that tax?
Thank you for your question. So I would suggest the council do two things. First, they should pass the short-term rental regulation bill and tax that passed out of my committee before I left the council. That will raise approximately $6 to $8 million, depending on who you're speaking to. Our tax experts have said 6. The industry, like Airbnb and Expedia, say closer to 10, so somewhere in between there. That bill is ready to be passed right now and could be implemented, and we could start collecting that tax in January. What's interesting about that tax is it puts short-term rental platforms on parity with our hotels, who already pay an amount similar to what we would be charging the short-term rental platforms. The other thing that the council can do is pass the ordinance that I sent down to the council a few weeks ago to mandate in city law that our contracts for human services, whether it's homelessness or any other social service we engage in, are awarded competitively, are awarded with specific measurable outcomes built into the contract so we can track what's happening to make certain that we're spending the public's dollars wisely and effectively, and also includes incentive performance pay when they exceed their goals so that they can be rewarded and do even more. I think it's, since I've been on the city council about 10 years, we have spent hundreds of millions of dollars addressing homelessness. And I can't actually sit here and tell you exactly what we've accomplished. You pointed out that the problem appears to be getting worse, and there's evidence of that. I just think we need to kind of retool our approach, not just keep doing what we've been doing, which perhaps is not working as well as we would all like, and make sure we invest wisely to move people into permanent housing.
So we do have one budget note there. The budget that you sent down also increases spending.
It does, yes.
By what? What's the amount that it
increases? By just over $2 million to a total of $63 million
and that is
next year.
40% increase over?
That's a 62% increase since 2014.
I just think we should note. Howard Wright.
I am not
mad at me for
thank
what I
you.
said.
I'm not in coordination with the previous question, but it's along the same lines. As a provider of 400 jobs here in Seattle, I'm opposed to the head tax or jobs tax or whatever label we're going to put on it. But I will say, as an owner of several hotels here in the region, I am supportive of this short-term tax. I think we should all be willing to pay our fair share. And so that was going to be a question of your opinion. Now that you've stated it, I want to thank you for that position.
Yeah, thank you very much. And what's interesting is the rental platforms, Airbnb, Expedia, and those, they came forward and volunteered to pay this tax. They argued to us, we want to be like the hotels. We'll pay the same thing that they're paying now.
There's been a recommendation that we should tighten our Seattle ethics and election rules And as a former member of that Ethics Commission, I wonder how you feel about this.
I helped write those rules when I joined the Ethics and Elections Commission in the late 1980s. I served there 12 years, 5 years as the chair. We just did a review and a change in those about 2 years ago, I think it was. And I think you're referring to contractors who do business with the city or with elected officials who then win and start doing business with those. I think that's a legitimate question to review, and I know the Ethics Commission has that on their docket for either their November or December meeting.
I have a question about dealing with different interests, talking to folks from different industries and different areas of the city at City Hall, not just for yourself, but for, because of all your experience in the City Council and now in the Mayor's office briefly, who do you think that has the loudest voice at City Hall? Is it the organized labor community? Is it the business community? Is it folks in neighborhoods? Is it social service providers? Who do you think, looking across the City Council, do people listen to most?
So I think when I'm talking to those various interest groups, they always point to somebody else as having more influence. I think they all complain that we don't listen to them enough. My style at the council, and certainly in the mayor's office, is I'll meet with anybody. It's just a matter of getting them scheduled. But I like to listen to all interest, even those I disagree with. Sometimes they persuade me that I should change my opinion. And I think it's important that everybody have a voice at City Hall. Director Nyland is here, and just recently, in the last year, the city has opened up the door so that more people can communicate with city government, not just through the traditional neighborhood councils or district councils, but other ways as well. And I think that's been a very positive move so that more people can speak to us at City Hall.
So on the last Civic Cocktail, we talked about Seattle politics drifting leftward. How does this manifest itself in policy from your perspective? Or how will it?
Proposals to ignore public health and safety problems in the city. I think that's not only...
Like what specific?
The encampments is an example, I think, of kind of a radical, unrealistic view of how cities balance our multiple obligations and competing interests. That's an example. I think the employee hours tax is, by some advocates, a way to poke at business. And what people don't realize, it's always talked about as this is the Amazon tax, which they would pay for sure if it's adopted. But there are hundreds, if not thousands, of small businesses that meet the minimum threshold of $5 million in gross revenues a year that would have to pay this tax, and their margins...
Does the city even need the money?
Their margins are razor thin. Yeah. Restaurants, retail shops, those types of things. So it's a tax on...
My sense of city budget is sort of flusher than normal, right? With all this, what's going on.
Financially, we're doing well.
Right.
And the city manages its finances quite conservatively, which is why we have the highest bond ratings that a city can have. So in that sense, that goes way back to Mayor Nichols, Mayor McGinn, Mayor Murray, and certainly myself have taken, let's manage our resources wisely, conservatively, so that we don't put the city at risk.
Good evening, Burgess. My name is Tennille Cato, and as the messenger and a community leader, I am here to ask you, while you serve as a government employee, how will you help us open up the birther room in City Hall? Because that's free for the mayor to open up, for honest, open, unlimited, uncontrolled conversation for all people to be equal pertaining to the decisions that are being made in the city. So
we've had this conversation for several years.
Okay.
That's not going to happen.
The reason why is we want to stop democratic fascism that's going on in the city today. That's the fundamental.
Okay, I want to give him a chance to answer.
I paid $25 just like everyone else, so I would like to get out my question.
I understand, but I'd just like to give him a chance to answer before we run out of time.
I wasn't finished, so he can't answer until I'm done.
So Tennille, we've had this conversation many times.
The reason why is because this is from the community, and I feel like you should listen so that you can answer accordingly. They want to know, how can you support us by stopping Democratic Mafia? They feel like the one-sided party is a Nazi social democratic mafia because just like you demonstrated, you're trying to control everything. We want to stop the Nazi Gestapo principles that punish us for having opposite opinions. And one way to do that is to open up the birth room in City Hall. It's free. That way, corporations, government, and the poor and the rich can all come together inclusively and tackle the fundamental problems that are going on
I'd
in the
like
city
for him
today.
to answer the question, and honestly, we're just running out of time. So
Sure.
both the room.
Last time, but
Hold
just
on.
like everyone else, I paid $25.
I understand. Both the room.
Yes, we are aware of this issue, and Bertha Knight Landis Room can be used by anyone in the community if a city council member sponsors the use.
So that's what it takes.
And
Okay, that's
no
interesting.
council member is willing to sponsor this event.
When you leave office at the end of November, what do you want people to say about your brief stint as mayor?
Well, I certainly have had a good time doing it. It's been fun.
That's good.
It's challenging at times, but I hope people will just realize that I did the best I could, and that I'm deeply grateful to the people of Seattle for electing me these years and giving me the honor to serve.
What advice do you have for your successor? Okay, we'll have to deal with that. What advice would you like to give to your successor on the city council, whoever it is that wins?
In my former position on the city council?
Position, yes.
To get things done, you need 5 votes. And to
Yeah.
get 5 votes, you need to work collaboratively with your colleagues. But it's a great opportunity to shape the future of the city.
Gene Godden?
Yes, what did you regret that you did not get done while in office? I know we all have regrets sometimes when we think about
Sounds like
something
she's
we
going to
could
tell
do
you her
more.
regrets.
I started running for mayor once, and I withdrew because it was clear I wasn't going to win, and I regret that, that I didn't keep going. But
Really, you think you should have stayed in?
well, it was clear
you
that
lost your consultants, what I remember.
I lost my consultant, and it was clear that I wasn't going to win. So one thing I learned in business is cut your losses quickly, and so I did that. I don't know if I have any real regrets. I think I have some legislation that I wished had passed. In the area of education, for example, I think we could have done more. That, various folks in the city didn't want us to get too close to interfering, in their words, with the school district, but I think we could have been a good nudger for the school district.
We have another 4 years or so before new light rail stations open, which could ease some of the transportation woes that the city has. Until then, is there any hope that it'll be easier to get around town? And if so, how could that be done?
Well, we passed the Move Seattle Transportation Levy, and we're making progress on implementing that. We certainly saw the biggest increase in transit service over the last 18 months or so. But I'm now on the Sound Transit Board. I get to go to 3 meetings in my 71 days, and we get a briefing tomorrow on that and what we can do to accelerate especially the Ballard and the West Seattle lines. The city government could do things to help accelerate that in terms of granting Sound Transit essential government facility status so that permitting would go faster. So we will try to help them as any way we can to speed that up.
Thank you. We have been talking with Mayor Tim Burgess, and we're coming right back to talk about the Me Too movement in Seattle. Thank you. And we're back with the Me Too part of the show with Mona Locke, former First Lady of Washington, Lisa Kessel, Professor of Politics and Government at the University of Puget Sound, and Mayor Burgess had so much fun, he's staying with us. Thank you all. Thank you all. Mona Locke, we start with you. You have been very candid about your own personal experiences with sexual harassment. What happened, sort of briefly, and why did you decide a year ago to speak out?
Well, thanks, Joni, for, first of all, tackling this issue, and thanks to the mayor for being the lone man up here. We appreciate that. I think for me, I don't want to think it was political, but really it was during the election cycle last year, almost exactly a year ago. And I think Trump had been caught on camera basically saying some really degrading things about women and about his abuses. bragging about it, and then women came forward, and I think it was watching the TV news every night with him shaming his victims. And having gone through a certain degree of sexual harassment and assault in the past, it lives with you. And it bubbles up. And I found myself really upset and just like, you know, I'll say talking to the TV.
It was loud. It was loud, and there was some shouting. But.
Well, and I thought, you know, really it was started as therapy for me. I thought, I just need to write this down because this is just, it just won't end. So I wrote, and after I wrote it, just stream of consciousness, my son, words that he said to me after one of the incidents of harassment where it was pretty bad, and he said, you know, Mom, he goes, you can do anything you want to do. And he goes, and I know someday you're going to use your voice to help other women. And so I wrote this just for me, and I thought about it, and I thought, you know what, this is the moment. Because how can we be in an election looking at someone who is openly boasting about treating women in this way and have no one step forth and say something? And so that's why I posted it.
So what did you post? Real briefly, what did you say to people when you're telling these embarrassing stories? I mean,
well, I was talking to myself, really. I didn't think about what I was saying to the public. What I was saying to the public was, where is the humanity in this, right? And that this isn't really about politics. What I was trying to say is this is about the treatment of human beings. And this can't go on. This culture has to end. That's what I was saying. What had happened to me, it started off very early in my career and basically went through all the years, off and on. And my first job, and the ironic thing is, it was during the Anita Hill confirmation, you know. So it was during this whole confirmation, and I was in this newsroom, and I had a news director who basically would look me, and I don't even know if I wrote about this, but he would just look every time I went to talk to him, I'm sorry, you're so pretty, I just can't think when you're around me, right? And it was the guys in the newsroom making a bet who would sleep with me first. It was, and finding out about that. It was a news director, we had a glass partition, he had a glass wall, and his desk was sideways, and on the side of his desk, he posted a photo of the two of us dancing, except I wasn't dancing with him. It was at a holiday party, and someone framed it to look like I was dancing with him. He put it on the side of the desk where he wouldn't even see it. My back, we had cubicles with our back facing the glass. So every time I turned around, I had to look at a picture of my boss and me.
Did you ever ask him to take it down?
It was my first job. I felt that if I complained, that would be the end of my career before it even started. So I said nothing. Like so many, I think, other women and men out there who are harassed, I mean, you don't say anything because for fear of your career.
Alisa, can you give us some workable definitions of sexual harassment and sexual assault? I think people sometimes get
Sure, yeah. So
confused.
sexual harassment usually takes one of two forms. So one form is called quid pro quo sexual harassment, a Latin term that means this for that, and that's an exchange. So that'd be something formal like, I will give you this promotion or this project for an exchange of something. The other kind, the kind that's probably a little bit more, I don't want to say it's more common, but I think it probably is more common, is called hostile work environment sexual harassment, and that's when speech and gestures and photographs and things like that create an environment in which the recipient of that information feels that they're being sexually, that there's an expectation of some kind of sexual responsiveness in order to do well. Sexual assault is a kind of blanket term that we could use to describe all kinds of non-consensual, usually physical engagement of a sexual nature. That could include rape, but it could also include things like groping someone or kissing someone without their permission.
Before we get to what to do about all this, I want to mention your crosscut piece that you wrote. And you seemed troubled by the idea that there is some sort of magic number of women, usually women, but not always, to be fair here, to say something before people buy it, before people believe it. Can you just touch briefly on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Me Too is a really wonderful, important tool for those who are interested in sharing their stories. But I also was troubled to see so many people in response to that campaign saying, I just didn't realize, I didn't know, but they suddenly believed it because now they knew a bunch of people for whom this was true. And I feel like that puts a pretty unfair burden on the people who are victims of sexual assault and sexual harassment, that you're only believed when you're believed in large numbers. So that individual people...
Is there a magic number, though?
There seems to be somewhere in the 40s.
Oh, right.
I mean, you know, it's like, it's with Weinstein, it was, I think, 13 before the story was reported. With I would say with Bill Cosby, I think it was about 31 women on the cover of New York Magazine. That was when that story started to be believed. It's always got to be some like large number of people before people will believe it. And the problem is the fact that so many people, often women, but not only women, of course, can say Me Too means that it's endemic, it's everywhere, and we can't just say we're going to believe it when we see enough people.
And the sad thing I think is that it's when they're prominent people that are accused of it, but it happens every day. It happens in every workplace, I would guess. It has happened to the majority of women and some men too, I would assume. But it's so difficult because we're stifled because of the fear of getting fired, the fear of people talking about you. Actually,
and not being believed.
Right?
And not being believed.
After I came out, at least I had a little credibility. Okay, the state was a little more comfortable with me, but I came out and literally I went to an event. 2 weeks later, a friend of mine at a major law firm said, you need to come speak because we have a group of about 60 women leaders from around the region. And your voice needs to be heard. They had another woman speaker who was a business owner from DC. We came out, we spoke. There was a Q&A, 40 minutes. I got asked no questions. And I wasn't only speaking about harassment, I was speaking actually about work-life balance. The event ended, and for the first time ever, not one person came up to me. Not one woman. And they were in their 20s, 30s, 40s. So afterwards, I went to say goodbye, and I was pretty humiliated. It was like never in my career. I mean, like nothing. It was like avoided like the plague. So I kind of said I had like the scarlet age, right? So I went to the organizer after, and I thanked her, and I was leaving. She said, "Thank you so much. Your voice meant so much," because all these women came up to me afterwards and said, "Gosh, can you please thank Mona for speaking out?"
I didn't say it to you.
And my friend said, "Well, wait a minute. She's right there. Just go talk to her." Not one person.
I want to bring in Mayor Burgess here. What is city policy on this area, and do you think is it working, or does it need to be changed?
So in terms of harassment, sexual harassment, or any kind of harassment, that's not allowed among city employees. And last year we instituted new in-service training for all of our employees on harassment and what to do if that occurs. So far, 89% of city employees have completed that course. All new employees take it on their second day of employment. So we've addressed that inside city government for the nearly 12,000 people that we work with. There's also education efforts inside city government to make sure that we understand what these incidents are, what they might be, who to talk to if it happens, those types of things. Then there's the whole other side of city government, which is responsible for law enforcement. Some of these incidents are criminal in nature,
right.
And there's a whole process for how we investigate those and how we walk with victims. We have a victim advocate that is assigned to these individuals so that as they go through the process,
But you've been involved in this for a long time in this area of discussion. Do you think city policy is about what it should be, or does it need to be updated in some way?
I think we're always willing to change and improve. We did that last year when we instituted the new training program for all city employees. But if people think it's not adequate, then we would certainly listen to that.
Mona, I wanted to ask you this. Economist Stephen Moore at CNN recently told Anderson Cooper that he heard some good advice for business leaders on how to avoid being accused of sexual harassment. And he was quoting this other executive. And what he said was, "I would never have a one-on-one meeting with a woman without someone else in the room." Is that a reasonable strategy?
No. I think he must not trust himself. Look, here's the thing. I don't think we're saying women don't want to be attractive to men and men don't want to be attractive to women. Everyone wants to be attractive, right? Just don't cross the line. Don't touch. Don't make someone feel uncomfortable. I think, to me, what's interesting is the male voice has been very missing, in my opinion. And I think it's really redefining culture and redefining really tradition and what we've grown up with, right? I mean, I had 2 brothers. I was a tomboy growing up, and I realized after the fact, it's because I didn't want to be the woman that everyone made jokes about, right? I mean, I'm guilty of it. I've probably made jokes or laughed, right? And I'm thinking probably every guy and a lot of women have probably gone along and laughed and made jokes and things, but because that was the time. But I think we're in a different time now, and it's not acceptable. And I personally think the one-on-one, I wouldn't have a problem, because my expectation is you're not going to touch me and you're not going to grab my leg, right? As a male, I think for them it's probably kind of confusing, right? A little bit worried about what do I do and how do I act appropriately and how make sure I don't make a mistake. And I think, I don't know if you'd agree, but to me the bottom line is really just don't be inappropriate, right? Don't touch, don't make sexual jokes or comments.
What do you think of that, Mayor Burgess, that strategy? No one-on-one meetings with women? Sounds
I don't
Mike
like
Pence,
that, because
maybe.
that immediately places women at a disadvantage. I mean, what if they need to have a one-on-one interview for a promotion? Do they don't get to have that because the CEO is following that advice? I mean, Jolene and I raised 3 daughters.
Exactly.
I've been taught a lot by them, and
4 to 1 sometimes, right?
yeah, exactly. And then we have granddaughters too, and they share their opinion, and they can't really talk very well yet. But I think, yeah, I don't like that strategy. There's other things you can do if you're afraid that you're going to be accused of something. You can take other steps that are not going to be adverse to women in the workplace.
Alisa, what advice would you give to companies that are trying to figure out how to handle these situations? They're all trying to figure it out because there's lawsuits looming, and there's people quitting, being forced to resign for conduct that just is over the line.
Yeah, I think that my first bit of advice would be to believe every one story, not to wait and expect that additional stories will come flooding in or might come in eventually that will sort of demonstrate the veracity of whatever claim is being made, but take that first claim and believe it and find out if it's in fact true. And the reason I say that is because so many of the stories we're hearing about people who 1 person or 2 people weren't enough, 3 or 4, sometimes more than that, were necessary before there would be any action. But every single time someone's being now sort of fired or put on administrative leave for sexual harassment, there are multiple victims. So if there's 1 person saying it, odds are pretty good that there's someone else who could say it too.
I'll bring the journalists in here.
There are women who have been sexually assaulted who are afraid to come forward, don't want to be public. What do we tell them about this?
Who's your question for? Who's your question for?
Oh, for all 3 of you, actually. What do we tell women who have been afraid? They're afraid that they're going to be destroyed if they be public with this.
I think that's a valid concern. I mean, I think it's really difficult in this time and age. I'd like to say speak out. I'd like to say come forward, but I also understand the reality of the situation. In fact, in one of my cases, it was interesting because literally in front of other people, this person would grab my leg or rub it. I mean, it was touching, it was inappropriate. And I consulted with an attorney, and the attorney looked into it and said, there's no other cases. And he said, don't even tell HR, because it's he said, she said, and you need to protect yourself. And that was the attorney's advice to me, which was kind of shocking, right? Don't even tell HR, because the fear was that they will take it, they will fire you.
Alisa, I wanted to ask you about college campuses. Has the culture changed in this regard on college campuses, or does more need to be done? What have you seen?
Well, in regard to sexual harassment, I can tell you what's happening on my campus. We just revised our policy on sexual harassment, and our policy now says that faculty can't have any relationships, any kind of inappropriate relationship with any student at any time. So just a real strengthening of that position, and I think that's probably important. I don't know I can speak to what other college campuses are doing, but that's something that I think college campuses are trying to take very, very seriously. Protecting students especially.
Can I answer
Yeah.
Jean's question? I think That's exactly why we have to have a culture change here, so that victims are not afraid to come forward and speak out. And then on the government side, we need to make sure that we have the services and the people who will walk with them as they go through that process. Because, dealing with the police and prosecutors and the courts, that's pretty intimidating to most people. And so having the victim advocates and changing the culture so that they feel comfortable coming forward is really what's important. And we start changing that culture when men stop behaving badly.
We sometimes hear that we are all to blame, that we have ignored things that we ought to have been aware of that are happening perhaps in our workplace. Are we all to blame, or is there blame to go around for this
Who's the goat,
sort of thing?
I think it was Dana Milbank wrote a great op-ed, I want to say in the Washington Post this weekend, about working at the New National Review? Where was the New Republic? Thank you. I always get those two NRs confused. And he was talking about what he didn't see. He said, I was really good friends with all these women who were now saying that they were sexually harassed, and I didn't know that. And I feel really bad that I didn't know that. And at first I said, well, I wasn't told, so how could I know? But what I really should be asking myself is what I did know. And what I did know was that my boss was regarded as kind of smarmy. And what I did know was that there was a network of men of which I was a member, I was benefiting from, but that other people weren't. I did know certain things. I did know that there were instances when people felt uncomfortable. So yeah, in a way, I think we're all complicit. I hold myself in that standard completely. I don't hold myself removed from that. I think if we really want to take seriously the problem of sexual harassment and the problem of sexual assault, huge problems in our culture, we need to look at what we are doing, what we are saying, and who we are protecting and when. And that's a really hard thing to do. It's very painful. But to be honest, I think that's what we have to do.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah. Part of the culture change, or the way culture is shaped by the media, how reporters and news organizations report on these issues. Have you seen anything positive in the way that reporters and news organizations have been reporting on the Me Too movement? And have you seen anything negative that has made you upset or angry about how you've seen these stories portrayed recently in the news?
I'm the cynical ex-journalist, right? I think it's great because it's selling, right? And so the more it sells, the more they will cover this type of thing. My fear is that it will be an everyday thing to the point where we get complacent about it, right? That we don't think about every single woman or every single person who is touched by sexual harassment, how it changes their lives, right? Like, do I button my shirt all the way up? How do I not want to appear a certain way? Is my skirt too tight, right? All of these things that I think about every single day when I go out, right? How do I appear? And we shouldn't have to worry like that. But I do think, to answer the question about the media, I have been thrilled that it's been covered, and it's been covered at Amazon. It's covered every day, British Parliament. I mean, you hear about cases now. Women are coming forth. And so the question always comes, is it a moment or is it a movement? And I think it's gaining steam. But I also don't think change happens overnight. I think I'm really realistic about thinking that it really has to start at home when kids are even younger. Because when you're looking at the college statistics, and 1 in 4, 1 in 5 women are sexually assaulted, by college, how do you teach a culture that they've grown up with certain values, certain standards, right? It doesn't make it okay. But we need to really focus on the young too, and our youth, and bring them along.
One thing I was thinking along these lines, just this morning, I was preparing for this evening, and I was Googling sexual harassment.
Lucky for us.
And the news stories of the day came up, and I kind of thought, wow, is this going to be one of those we only care about high-profile cases sort of situation where, I feel pretty confident saying that probably almost every single woman you know, and a lot of men that you know, have been sexually harassed, and it is not enough to say, well, we're cleaning out, Hollywood, or we're cleaning out the NPR and the New York Times and those kinds of prominent organizations, but sort of to distance ourselves, to think that those are high-profile cases over there in an industry or a field I don't work in, is a mistake.
Mayor Burgess, the other night Bill Maher said that he has spent his whole life trying to understand women, but that now he thinks he doesn't understand men. Not speaking for all men, but just
no, I don't.
Just bear with me here. What drives men to do this? Is this about power? What is this about?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that question. But I said earlier that men should stop behaving badly, and I noticed how younger men, boys, treated my daughters, and at times was appalled, and immediately wondered, gosh, who raised them? That type of thing. But we just have to draw a line in the sand and respect our fellow human beings. And that's why I like this Me Too movement, because people are standing up and speaking out. And I think that's extremely positive.
I would like to hear from more men too, right? I mean, it's all women's voices for the most part. And I wonder what's going on in the man's head, right? And where they are in terms of the shift.
Elisa, what do you think it's about?
I think it's about power. I think if you look at who is victimized by sexual assault and by rape and sexual harassment, the statistics are always vulnerable populations. It's not just women, it's people of color, it's poor folks, it's trans and queer folks. These are the populations that are most likely to be victimized, which tells me that what it's really about is the exertion of power by one person over another.
Mona, I want to get your reaction to part of a Lindy West column. I don't know if you saw it. It was in the New York Times, I think, last week. She writes, this is part of it: "The witches are coming, but not for your life. We're coming for your legacy. The cost of being Harvey Weinstein is not getting to be Harvey Weinstein anymore. We don't have the justice system on our side. We don't have institutional power. We don't have millions of dollars or the presidency, but we have our stories and we're going to keep telling them." What do you think of that?
I think it's so powerful. I think it's one of the most powerful tools we have. I think with the Me Too campaign, women are fearful, as I was, of coming forth and actually telling your story. So this was an easier way to say Me Too. You don't have to say anything more or anything less but Me Too. It's a start. The question really is, where do we go from here, right?
Well, that's something I also want to bring up. So a good friend of mine, the former executive editor of the Seattle Times, Dave Boardman, wrote a piece, I think it was in Philly.com, and he talked about, and remember the Seattle Times 25 years ago broke a story about then Senator Brock Adams and this awful cocktail he had, and he pursued women. And Boardman wrote that he thought at the time, 25 years ago, that we had reached a tipping point and that behavior would change. And so he now asks in this piece that he wrote, is this the tipping point? Is behavior going to change from this point forward? So you have Michael Oreskes at NPR, formerly of the New York Times. You have different people, different actors, people every day. Is this the tipping point? I'd like you all to address that. Does anyone think this is the moment where it's going to change from here on out?
I think it has changed. I mean, I think that more and more people are coming out. Right? If you think about it, this Me Too moment was started, 10 years ago by a woman named Tarana Burke. And she started it as an activist against sexual assault, right? For women, people of color. And it took 10 years, right? I mean, I think we're doing incremental steps, but I think—
It took 10 years, but during that time, everything was still going on and all these people were pursuing this same—
The fact that now we have people coming out every day in the news and that the media finds it important enough to cover, right? Whether it starts with bigger name people and that's why it became news, I think, like I said, my concern is that we will get complacent after we keep hearing about it. But I do think—
We always run on to the next subject, whatever it is.
Right.
It just goes so
right.
quickly.
I'm hopeful.
Tipping point, do you think?
I'm a hopeful person, but I think it's going to depend less on the handful of people who are going to get fired in the next few months and more on what we all do collectively to respond and to refuse to allow sexual harassment and sexual assault to continue. that's the tipping point when that
Mayor
happens.
Burgess, are we at a tipping point? Will behavior really change?
I don't know the answer to that, but I do know what our obligation is. Our obligation is to make certain that victims of sexual harassment and assault feel free to tell their story and, in fact, encouraged. I think we have a role in city government to help set that environment so that people will feel free to come forward and tell their stories. The more we are aware through media coverage of how prevalent this is, I think that will create perhaps and hopefully a groundswell of public opinion that will say we're just not going to tolerate this anymore.
So sort of a jump ball here. I want to ask this delicately and respectfully, but can this Me Too movement go too far? In other words, do we want to ban flirting in the workplace? You know, a lot of people meet their life partners on college campuses or at the workplace. What do you think of it? Can it go too far?
Well, I don't think we're talking about flirting like maybe we would find acceptable. We're not going to ban that. Mona talked about that earlier. I mean,
she touched on it, yeah. I'd be curious
so
what...
It's the inappropriate behavior, and if we probably surveyed everybody here, we'd all know where that line is of what's appropriate and inappropriate. It's willingness to come up and talk about it and be, as Mona said, to come out and talk about the issue that's, I think, important so that people will feel comfortable to do that.
What would be interesting is in this room, like how many people would feel comfortable if we said, you know, how many of you have dealt with sexual harassment or assault? How many would actually raise their hands, right? It's that safety. It's like feeling safe enough to speak out, and part of it.
So let's do that. Let's ask the audience. How many of you have had experiences with this? We'll put the cameras on.
Right, and there's cameras on.
Oh my gosh.
You feel empowered.
So
I
it's
love
more
it.
interesting to say how many haven't, right? Because it's pretty much...
And there were men too.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Do you think it can go too far, Lisa? Real tight, we're running out of time.
I think not flirting in the workplace is an appropriate price to pay to not sexually harass in the workplace.
Well, there you go. We have been talking with Mona Locke and Alyssa Kessel and Seattle Mayor Tim Burgess. Civic Cocktail will return next month with Daniel James Brown, the author of the best-selling book Boys in the Boat, and he's now working on a new book. Thanks so much for watching. Thank you.